Welcome to Overtime. My name is Nicholas Lamar Suter. With me today are 𝐒𝐨𝐮𝐭𝐭𝐞𝐫 and Joe, and we are here to discuss today Colin Powell, the first black U.S. Secretary of State and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, died this morning from complications from COVID-19 at the age of 84. He had a number of other actual illnesses. He had multiple melanoma. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm not sure, which is a cancer of the plasma cells. He also had Parkinson's. And he was in the military, obviously, and served in Vietnam and was very proud of the United States and had a way of always finding the middle. Even though he was a conservative, he was a registered Republican up until actually about Trump. He certainly started to have his doubts about his own party during the McCain-Palin, which we'll discuss. But it was really with Donald Trump where he said he no longer recognized the Republican Party, and it was not the party that he wanted to belong to anymore. And he had started, in fact, voting already Democrat well before that. So Colin Powell, irrefutably, I think, American patriot, conservative, and first black Secretary of State in the United States and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has died at the age of 84. So, thank you both for joining me, and I want to, why don't we start wherever you guys want to start? So was there anything in particular that you thought that we should discuss in regards to Colin Powell?
Probably we should start with nobody apparently can hear you.
I think it's a troll. I think it's a joke. I could be wrong. I think it's a troll, so let's assume they can hear me. And no, I think they can't. Does appear like that mic isn't really. That mic isn't. We'll double check. Yeah, no, we really shouldn't troll like that and run with that, because then I'll spend 20 minutes and then I'll destroy the sound.
I can hear us on the street.
Trying to fix it. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the joke, Porpoise, but I'll literally end up. You know how computers work. I'll end up flicking switches trying to fix it, and Joe will come out sounding like Kermit the Frog. So let's not do that. So Joe, what were you going to say?
Well, I was saying the what we talked about beforehand, just the idea that, because obviously there's people weighing in from all sides. There's people praising him, but there's also, he has detractors. And I think of all the knocks against his career would have been, the time in the UN when he was making the case to the UN for the invasion of Iraq, about the weapons of mass destruction. And the harshest critics basically say that he lied in the UN, and that makes him a war criminal, because certainly there were war crimes associated with that invasion. And so I guess the question really comes down to is, did he know that the information was false or not? Because if he did, then those criticisms are valid. If he did not, then those criticisms are excessive and not valid. You can still say it's a precipitating event, but whether or not he knew is germane to whether or not he's how guilty he is, I guess.
Well, and even if he knew, he certainly did. That doesn't mean that he knew, any crimes that would be precipitated afterwards. Although it's still, right. I mean, if he knew that there was fabrication of evidence to war, that's obviously a pretty serious thing. Xander, what are your thoughts?
I think it's going to kind of depend upon whether the intelligence community was actually being honest, if they knew what the truth of the matter was. Because I think that if the intelligence community actually knew, then it's a good chance that Powell would have known what they knew. So I'm not sure if it was just, I'm not sure where the narrative of weapons of mass destruction actually came from. So I don't know if the intelligence community was mistaken or giving bad information, or if they really knew and it was just a political push to give them an excuse to go into Iraq. So I think that's really going to depend upon what the actual intelligence community. I have a hard time believing that they would have known the truth of it, and he wouldn't have known what they knew, at least.
Right, and the thing is that, I mean, part of the problem is always that depending on who's running the intelligence community at the time and who they're trying to serve, it's hard to know what the truth there is, because we know in the past, you look back at not only Vietnam, but you also look at during the Cold War, and there's a lot of intelligence that was cooked up because there were people that felt, that being alarmist was the safer path, and so that they exaggerated, or in the case where there was multiple information that was conflicting, they would always go with the worst possible information, which isn't always a bad thing. I mean, if in that case where you have, I can choose to believe report A or report B, and if report B is the worst one, and if I go with that, and if I'm over prepared, then that's there's usually fewer detriments to that. But in the case if you actually kind of know that A is true and kind of B is just there as a useful tool to achieve a political aim you want, that's not so hot. So I don't know that we'll ever know. But I did see an article today. I was trying to find out, and I did see an article that basically suggested that Powell was pissed about after the fact when things turned out to be demonstrated to be false. And also, I guess there was the whole time misgivings within the military about going, and he was actually the one. He actually, he basically tried to talk Bush out of it and said, it's not just a matter of can we go in and knock over the Iraqi army? Sure, we can, but once you do that, what do we do next? So, I think that I tend to lean in his favor. Because I think that what ends up happening is a lot of people who aren't politically savvy, who they only ever look at the results and they don't look at the process, and then they make assumptions that, well, if a certain result happened, then that was intended, and it's very much like people who creationists and other woo believers that they'll oh, this happened, it must have been on purpose, so therefore there's an agency that made that happen, as opposed to should just happen. So
well, I'd forgotten about that, but I remember now that there were reports of him really losing his shit when he found out that he had been lied to by the intelligence communities. Now, it looks like our intelligence community had a pretty good idea that they weren't there, but it's still impossible to really know for certain. Certainly MI6 said, and MI6 is the British intelligence agency, said, weren't there, wasn't there. UN said it wasn't there. I think it was the UAEA said wasn't there. So we were the only ones who were saying it was there, and MI6, the Downing Street memo, they were telling their own prime minister that the U.S. is fabricating, cherry picking evidence to reach a conclusion, because really, young baby Bush wanted to prove he had as big a dick as his father, and wanted to go in and finish what presumably his father had failed to finish. So, and he even said, well, really, we got to go in because they tried to kill my pappy. And it's sort of like that also, by the way, wasn't true. But
right.
Yeah, so purportedly he was really upset by that, but that I think is the darkest mark, that he had spoke to the UN in defense of the war, but B had also said that this was something that was necessary, but he was under instructions to sell the war. So. Yes, please. I think somebody was going to say something on that.
No, I was going to say, I wish I could remember the name of the guy. There was one of the weapons inspectors that all leading up to it was saying they're there. And then shortly before we went in, changed his mind, flipped us, it went the other way. And I never understood at the time why that, okay, if they're not there, why were you so gung-ho, 3 weeks ago? And I can't remember the guy's name. He was all over the news at the time, both beating the drum and then saying no, it's not really true at a later time. And I don't know, did he get new information, or was he being pressured early on and decided, oh, we're going down a wrong path and I gotta try to halt things. So who knows?
Well, so now one of the things that was very contentious was when Barack Obama was running against John McCain. Powell, who was actually extraordinarily important to the Republican Party because there were constant complaints that Republicans were racist, and here was a black man in the upper echelons of power in the Republican Party. He was in the military, which didn't hurt. He wasn't a politician per se, so he certainly, he wasn't running for office himself, but his endorsement meant a lot, again, especially as a prior Secretary of State and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. However, he supported John McCain until John McCain did one thing: picked Sarah Palin as his running mate. And Colin Powell would refuse to say who he was going to vote for, although it was pretty clear he was going to vote, and it wasn't going to be for McCain, and he had one option left. But having said that, without being willing to say he was going to vote for the opposition, he said his conscience and his love for this country dictated that he could not vote for McCain because he could not, quote, put that woman within one heartbeat of the presidency. This ended his political career. He did the one thing that Republicans are never allowed to. They say Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. And he refused to support their candidate against who was seen as this ultra-liberal. He really wasn't, but nonetheless. And he was almost, for the most part, never respected on any issue from the conservative side again. So I was wondering your guys' thoughts on that.
I have something to say, but I'll let Sandra go first. Yeah, no, I agree with this Andring. I mean, I think that particularly, I mean, it takes less courage on the left to do that because the left is never, we're never in line. But it's a lot harder for someone on that side of the aisle to step out and say, yeah, no, this is the wrong step. So yeah, and that also was what makes me think that if he really honestly knew that the weapons weren't there, I tend to believe that he would have, one, he wouldn't have sold it so hard. Even if he was forced to, if they put him out there and said, hey, look, you either have to do this or resign. One, he might have resigned. Two, even if he did go there and sell it, I think he would have sandbagged it.
All right, so
I don't think that he would have.
If I can get a quick, yes, please finish your. I apologize.
Yeah, I don't think that. I don't think that he would have gone out there and knowingly lied. I don't have proof, but I don't think that he would have done that based on other things that he's done. I think that, and I think part of it too is that he's a little bit of a middletarian. And if you know what I mean, if I don't know if you ever heard that expression,
I haven't. Made it up, I'll say you made it, but it's a Joe original, so I think this is perfect.
Yeah. It's the difference between the center and the middle. The political center doesn't really move, but the political middle does. So if one or both sides goes to an extreme, a middletarian kind of like is the one that tries to split the baby, you know, in an almost literal sense of like, well, if side A says this and side B says that, I'll try to pick some middle position, which isn't necessarily the political center. Because again, if one side is, oh, you know, just, you know, in the middle, you know, like they're on the left or the right or whatever, and they're reasonable, and then the other side is radical, then the middletarian ends up picking a side that ends up kind of giving weight to the radical because the radicals have moved so far out. So, and I think another part of it is the fact that, you know, since you know, he was given the opportunity during a Republican administration that, you know, he tried to you know, go along for a while, but and I think there are people who just think that, you know, I think it is good to try to be balanced, and it is good to try to you know, listen to, you know, all sides kind of thing. But I think, you know, even there, you know, even as he eventually came to the conclusion, if one side is going really ridiculous, you can't give them cover anymore, because then now you're going to be doing a lot of damage.
Well, now, so Ksandring, for whatever reason, doesn't like being asked to repeat himself. He always makes some silly joke. So what I'll say is, Ksandring had said, I think something.
You got quiet there, Nick. Can't hear you.
Oh, dear Lord, am I? Oh, yeah, I'll bet. Yeah, sorry.
Awkward.
Yeah.
We can't hear you, Nick.
Yeah, you. Okay, yeah, you're on a different thing.
There we go.
So, anyways, Ksandring had said essentially was that we need more people like him, and that it takes a tremendous amount of courage, even if he did not necessarily know the consequences when he did it. It took a lot of courage to stand up against his party and say it was insanity. Palin was utterly. I mean, I really couldn't believe what planet I was on when that happened. Could I get a quick sound check from you, Ksandring? I'm pretty sure that your sound is repaired, but I want to just check that.
Check. Can you hear me now? Okay,
this suggests that you're coming out, but I love the pause he did for a little while, just to screw us. Bunch of clowns on this show. I'm so glad you're here, Ksandring. Thank you so much for coming.
If it was light enough around that you could actually see me, and I had my camera on, I would have just started mouthing things and not said anything. But since you can't see me, I had to pause for a minute.
Okay, well, if anyone can't hear that conversation that we just had where Ksandring was being a smartass, which they would have been able to guess anyway, even with the silence, like, Ksandring is probably just fucking breaking Nick's balls right now. So, all right, perfect. So,
if my mouth is going, you can guarantee that's what's happening.
Yeah, I've noticed that. So now here's one of the interesting things about him, which is that he was actually friends with Bob Woodward, which was not particularly well liked by the right. He was an equal opportunity, you know, he just went where the stories went, but he, you know, had been known for hitting the right. And but he actually, there was an interview right before he died. It's believed to be the last interview that he had. It was, in fact, with Bob Woodward. And at least some sections of those have been released. In it, he had said, for example, don't feel sorry for me, for God's sake. I'm almost 85 years old. I haven't lost a day fighting these two diseases. I'm in good shape. And then he said that he thought that what had happened with President Donald Trump on January 6th was, quote, awful, and that, quote, he was going there to overturn the government. This was Powell's views on Trump. He also said that Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, had actually called Powell after the church event. Now, we all remember the church event. In fact, I think we carried it live and also had footage of how they cleared the area, that church, so that Trump could stand there very awkwardly with a Bible and talk about, you know, God's presence and this being the greatest country, and how, oh, by the way, I will do whatever it takes to stop all of these riots. These were the riots protesting the death of George Floyd. So Milley had stood right next to him, and then after they discovered that it had been cleared in the way it had, and what appeared to be a gross abuse of power, Milley decided he was going to, well, he was at least considering resigning. And so he spoke to Trump and said, should I resign? sorry, not Trump, Powell, and said, asked if he should resign. Powell said, "Fuck no." And then, according to Woodward, said, quote, "I told you never to take the job. You should never have taken the job. Trump's a fucking menace." So, from a man who was otherwise reasonably mild-mannered. And then he was asked by Woodward who was the strongest person he had ever met. And Powell said, "It's Alma Powell, his wife. She was there with me the whole time. We've been married 58 years, and she put up with a lot. She took care of the kids when I was, running around, and she was always there for me. She'd always tell me, 'That's not a good idea,' and she was usually right." He then added that she had always thought him talking to Woodward was not a good idea. So, yeah. Now, I think I would like to discuss one other thing before I think we start to wrap this up, which was this cause of death, which was reported as complications from COVID-19. Now, he was double vaccinated, so how is that the case? Does that mean that the vaccines are not working?
No. The thing is that, first off, no vaccine is 100%. So, even if somebody in perfect health who was double vaccinated, they saying it's like 95%. Well, there's that 5%. That means 1 in 20 who are vaccinated. And then we actually seen it's actually less than that. It's probably about 2%. So, that's just bad. That would be bad luck for anybody. But considering the fact that he also is fighting the cancer, as you mentioned before, and he also has Parkinson's, so he is compromised. So that was going to make anybody's survival less than that 90 whatever percent. And the thing that pisses me off the most about the right wing trying to make the anti-vax people trying to make hay over this is that when we counted people with comorbidities and who had COVID and died because COVID pushed them over the edge, they would cry foul and say, "Oh, well, no, they really died of cancer or whatever else." But then when they get to try to use it for their purposes, all of a sudden, "Oh, see, that's proof the vaccine doesn't work." And I'm like, well, that's not how any of this works. It's like that lady with the the thing, I unfriend you. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. So they're a combination of stupid and or dishonest. It's infuriating because, like I said, they're not really looking at the fact that no one ever said that no one would die of COVID if you had the vaccine. It just says your odds of catching it are very low. If you do catch it, your odds of symptoms are very low, and if you do get symptoms, the odds of you dying are very low. Well, you can roll three D6s, and eventually you're going to roll 3 1s. It's just going to happen. Well, he rolled 3 1s.
Auto fail.
Yeah.
Yep. Is entering any other thoughts on that?
I think that it's dishonest to try and use his death against COVID, because there is, not only his age, he was already in an age bracket that was highly susceptible to it, and had high morbidity rates if they caught it. Plus his immune system's already fighting 2 other diseases. It's not particularly surprising that this could cause serious complications and have a much higher likelihood of death, even if he was vaccinated. So, I find it dishonest of people to try and use this as an argument against the vaccines in any way, shape, or form, because, no matter who he is, no matter what he was dealing with, you can't use a single case to justify, an entire position. Like, you need a lot more data than just one data point.
Right.
So it's ridiculous that anybody would use this as an argument for anything. He's a single data point, and you need a hell of a lot more data points before you can start coming to any kinds of conclusions. So,
exactly.
But it's people. Yeah, it's just people pushing. They're looking for an excuse to push to justify their positions.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether it makes logical sense or not.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And basically, one data point, we call that an anecdote. You know, the thing that gets me too is they'll jump up and down at that, but then they'll ignore the fact that 98, 99% of people who die of COVID are unvaccinated.
Yeah. I think it's 99% if I remember correctly. It's staggering. It's at
Yeah,
least 95,
either 98 or
maybe
99, either 98 or 99. And so they'll look at the 2% that are vaccinated and like, oh, see, that proves vaccine doesn't work. I'm like, you guys aren't good at math. Like,
Yeah. Well, it's and the outlier cases are always a problem, and if you cherry pick, you can go with them. I thought the other interesting thing that I had heard this pointed out earlier, and I thought this was interesting that, of course, when they start doing the trials for a drug like this, they give them to a wide variety of people, and some of those people are in situations that may result in their death for other causes. And what they usually do is they track how many people died after receiving the vaccine, not what they died of. That's a separate factor. And one of the issues is then you can have it if they give the vaccine to a high-risk group of just dying of natural causes, of people who are over 90, over a period of a year, 2 years, a number of those people are going to die having nothing to do with the COVID vaccine. But if you're tracking deaths of people who actually received the vaccine, those numbers are included. So
right.
it cuts both ways, and it's interesting how one way it seems to demonstrate their point, and the other way also seems to demonstrate their point. It's interesting logic there, but
well, and just to bolster your point. Now, my wife actually works in pharma. She works in clinical trials. She has for the last 22 years. And she actually started out tracking what's called serious adverse events. So anything that happens that's more than, okay, I sneezed or something like that. Anything that requires hospitalization, anything or somebody has to go to a special doctor visit to follow up on, they record that. And you're right. It doesn't matter what it is. You could get hit by a bus, and they have to document that shit and include it in the study. And then, of course, no drug was 100%. So what ends up happening, like when you listen to the commercials for some drug and they list the side effects, what they do is they go through all the things that came up during the SAEs and they list those. The thing is that and because no drug is 100%, that's why sometimes the symptoms that they refer to are the thing that the disease that the medicine's actually there to solve, because basically in that it didn't work for that person, so they call it a side effect. It's not really a side effect. The medication didn't do that. It's just the medication didn't fix it, but it has to get counted. So a lot of when people talk about this stuff, they're very ignorant in how the process works. And it's and I know why they do it. I mean, basically, the idea is they'd rather give you the worst possible picture rather than oversell what the medication can do or what the risks are. Because it's better that you were overwarned and then underwarned. So that's the path they choose.
Well, and that's also the next step in the process. I mean, the first step in the process is gathering all of the data. That includes everybody who died. Doesn't matter how they died. That's data. The chances that COVID causes people to get hit by cars that the vaccine causes people to get hit by cars is phenomenally small. But it has happened where something really bizarre comes up. It turns out it increases instances of sleepwalking. People are going out. You don't know. So the reality is we know when we look at it, we sit there and say, okay, this guy was hit by a car. It wasn't the vaccine. But on the flip side, they record all that data, and then they have to run the multivariable analysis on the thing, and they have to break down all of the possible, and then they come up with okay, this is how that data breaks down. And then by that point, they've usually collected more data, it's just the raw data. And so you have how many people died while taking it. It doesn't say, it's not meant to say this is how many people died as a result of taking it. It's just and then the other thing you can even just start if you wanted to, and this is the most basic analysis you can do, is say, okay, if the vaccine was given to a random sample of the population, say 10,000 people picked at random, and by 2 years later, 2% of them were dead, that number means absolutely nothing unless you figure out what would happen if you take 10,000 random people from the population at that same time, it's the control group, and figure out where they are, 2 years later. And if 2 years later it's 2%, that's a pretty good sign. It's not proof, but it's a pretty good sign that the vaccine is perfectly safe, even though you look at that list and, wow, 2% of the people who took this vaccine died? Really? Yeah.
Right. 2% of people that had just existed died.
Yeah.
If you think about it, I mean, if you any given year, if we lived to 100, you'd expect at least 1% of the population to be dying. If the population was fixed and everyone lived to 100, you would expect 1% of the population to die every year.
Yep.
But it's and another thing too, and what you said about the analysis, what ended up happening is they err on the side of caution. So if the cause of death is indeterminate, they tend to lean in favor of counting it, again, simply because it's better to be more worried than you have to be than to be less worried. And then now, granted, the other thing that I've heard the critics of the vaccinations will say is that, well, we don't know the long-term effects. And that's true. We don't know any long-term effects because it's only been, a year, not even quite a year since we've had the vaccine. And that's what happened with 𝐍𝐤𝐜𝐜𝐸. 𝐍𝐤𝐜𝐸, it was, there's long-term stuff that happens that you can't tell in a short study that normally takes 2 to 3 years. Some things only develop over a longer periods of time where you have to start to notice patterns. But the thing is that we also are already starting to see long-term effects of COVID. Like, was it 1/3 of all people who survive COVID have some long-term damage? So. Yep. So the possibility of maybe a long-term effect of a vaccine versus known long-term effects in a large segment of the population that we're already witnessing, and it could actually end up being worse than we think. If we're seeing that number now, it could actually be worse. So it's kind of a ridiculous concern, especially since the carriers that the vaccines use are not new. So we already know what the efficacy and safety of those carriers are. The only thing that's new is for the Moderna and Pfizer is the RNA treatment, which actually should be less dangerous because you're not getting a live vaccine. You're not even getting a dead vaccine. You're getting a section of a copy of DNA, of RNA, that basically lets your body recognize, hey, if you see this spike, kill that. That's bad.
We got a question in the live chat I'd like to answer. What are the requirements for becoming president of the United States? Okay, so this is something I've actually gone through in the Constitution multiple times. First of all, you have to be 35 years old or older. You have to have been born in the United States. You need to graduate from Harvard, magna cum laude. You also need to be a lawyer. You need to be president of the Harvard Review. You need to successfully act as a community operator, preferably in dilapidated areas. You can't have a single, and I mean not one, skeleton in your closet that anyone can find. You have to be happily married and have multiple kids. Or you can be white. Those are the requirements for becoming president of the United States. All right. So, moving forward, I think that just about covers it. So the fact is he was vaccinated, fully vaccinated. He was also 85. That put him at a high-risk group. There is 1% of the population that of all the people dying of COVID, 1% really did receive the vaccine, but that is still so much better than not getting it. And he had 2 illnesses which compromised his immune system. We are covering this because he was a remarkable man, and he more than once put the country ahead of his politics and ahead of his own career, and he paid a price for it. John McCain is another similar one. Both of them are men from, at least for me, very much on the other side of the aisle. But wow, I would like conservatives if there were more of them like that. And at a minimum, I think our country would be better if people on both sides of the aisle were a lot more like either of those two men. And that's why so many people paid their respects to McCain, and that's why I hope people will do so with Colin Powell. We have coming up on Wednesday, we have overtime. We're going to do a regular rundown. This will probably come up again, but Joe and I will be doing a rundown of the week's news, and I have a sneaking suspicion there's going to be a couple of things coming up, and we should probably also cover what's facing the Supreme Court over the next 2 months, because it looks like Roe v. Wade is going to be up there, and I think there's going to be some consequences. So we're going to discuss that. We're also going to talk to Myth Vision on Thursday, and he's going to talk to us about addiction and how to. Yes, I'm sorry, were you going to say something, or?
I have one more thing on Powell to say too.
Let me wrap up what we're doing, and then
sure.
we'll hit that. I'd love to hear from each of you, and then we're also going to. So we're going to be covering with Myth Vision addiction. He's been open about his history with addiction and how he's dealt with it and how he's tried to help others with addiction. So we're going to be discussing that Thursday, and then next Wednesday, so a week from Wednesday, Dr. John Shook will be back to tell us a bit about the definition of atheism. Is there one definition? Is it polysemous? How and when should you use which version? Under what context? And what does it really mean to be an atheist? So that will be Dr. John Shook a week from Wednesday. So I'd love to hear from each of you guys. Any remaining thoughts? Joe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess if for anybody who's still, maybe harboring some angst about Powell and the UN, I guess I'd say this. Again, my feeling is I don't believe that he actually lied. He said something that was untrue, but that's different than necessarily lying. A lie, when you tell a lie, it means you actually know the information you're giving is untrue. But anybody still has misgivings. If you were in favor of the war at any time, was that what convinced you? Because I know a lot of people who said, "Oh, I would have voted against it," who then, when I push them on it, say they were actually in favor of it at the time. Colin Powell isn't who convinced me. I didn't believe anything that came out of the administration. Who convinced me was Tony Blair. So I'll not forgive Tony Blair, because apparently Tony Blair was told that this was all crap. And he went out there and said, well, we're going to support America because that's the right thing, because those weapons are there. So Colin Powell didn't in any way influence me, but Tony Blair did. So, and the fact that everybody tries to pretend now that they didn't, 70-something% of the population was in favor of it at the time. So at least some of the people who say they were against it are full of crap.
Yeah, that was Tony Blair absolutely knew. Tony Blair absolutely knew, and that's essentially what the Downing Street memo said, and everybody was telling him it was. And I think it's not even. I think he wanted to cozy up to Bush because he wanted to improve a relationship with the only remaining superpower. That's it, and he was, and that's just like, dude. Listen, we were that superpower, so hey, I'm thrilled that you want to be buddy with us. But the damage that did to a lot of people, including this country, and the freedom fries and all that other. Oh dear Lord, when have the French ever did anything for us? I don't know. I was standing on top of the Statue of Liberty trying to think the same thing. All right, Xandring, have you got any thoughts?
I think that overall he was a very he was a man of great integrity, and when you look at all of the other actions that he took surrounding and stances that he had surrounding or around, not counting the specific Iraq War, I think it lends credence to the fact that he wasn't specifically lying. He wasn't intending to deceive anybody. This was the story he was given, and so that's the story that he went with. And it turns out to be wrong. Of course, when you have the hindsight of 2020, it makes things a hell of a lot more clear. So I think that the world would be, or our country would be a lot better off. Well, the world would too, but our country would be a lot better off if more people could actually stick to the morals and principles that they espouse versus whatever's politically convenient, just win. When you see something going wrong or see something not being done right or bad decisions being made, standing up and saying something about it. I think it'll make us all a lot better.
All right. Well, I think that is the perfect note to end on. So thank you all for joining us for this special edition of Overtime. Colin Powell, former Secretary of State, former Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, first black man to hold either position, has died from complications of COVID. He was 84. He is, well, save that. We already covered that. But thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you guys on Wednesday for Overtime, and then Thursday for Myth Vision to discuss and at some point I'll learn English, to discuss addiction. Thank you all for joining us.